Hey, what's happening, guys? It's Dean from Electronisounds. Stick around. Today we're going to do some sound design featuring the Big Sky Reverb, Beatmaker 3 on iPad, and a Virus Dark Star synthesizer. Stick around, guys.
Electronisounds Audio, the YouTube channel for you.
We're going to start with the full setup and routing today so that I can show you guys how this is all being set up. I usually like to use an interface like the Novation Audio Hub 2x4 because it works really good with the iPad, but it can be a little bit pricey. And today we're going to literally try this experiment with like the least expensive audio interface that I've got. This is the Behringer Euphoria UM2. As we keep going, you'll see that this did not actually work out for me today. We're going to start by, we're going to need a powered USB hub. We're going to plug the Behringer into this powered USB hub. I've already got this plugged into wall power. Oops. Now, the hub itself does not need wall power, but you are going to need to plug it into a powered USB hub. If you try to plug this directly into your iPad, it's not going to be compatible. We're going to take the Apple brand USB to Lightning 3 adapter, and we're going to plug that into the end of the USB hub here, and then we'll plug this into our iPad. The reason I like to use the Lightning to USB 3 adapter, let's flip that around, no, that's gonna be okay, is because there's an extra port here which will allow us to take an extra out from this and plug this into wall power. You could use the little AC adapter that comes with your iPad. I like to use these Anchor battery packs a lot of time, and this eliminates the possibility of like ground noise loops in the system while we're working a lot of the time. I'll just kind of run this out of the way over here. If I can, I'll try to keep the power cords away from the audio cords as well, to the most that we can here. Now we're going to plug in the Virus Dark Star to our Big Sky, and we're just going to take some short cables here from Monster Cable. I'm just going to take a left, and we're going to take that into the input of the Big Sky. So the output of your synth, this could be any synthesizer. The reason that I'm using the Virus Dark Star is because it's pretty much the most expensive keyboard in the studio, synth in the studio. And since I'm going to be giving these patches away that we make today, might as well use the big guy, you know what I'm saying? But this could be anything. This could be a little, budget synthesizer, whatever you've got. And we're going to plug in the output of this into the input of the Big Sky, okay? Then we're going to take the output of the Big Sky. We're going to plug this into the front of our audio interface, which again, today, is the Behringer Euphoria UM2. Alrighty. Now we're just going to take another set of cables, and we're going to take the output of the Behringer audio interface, and we're going to plug that into our mixer. If you don't have a mixer, you could just plug your headphones directly into the front of the interface here. Got a bit of a spaghetti situation happening here. Okay. Well, actually, these outputs are RCA outputs, so I'm going to need to get a different cable than these standard 1/4 inch to plug that into my mixer, and we'll do that in just a sec. So we've got, let's see here, we'll go ahead and get power to our Virus. We've got power to our iPad. We're going to fire up Beatmaker 3 here. And let's see, our battery's good, our connection's good. We've got power, we've got power, and we've got power here. Okay, let me just pause for 1 second and find the appropriate cables to plug our audio interface into the mixer. Sweet. Okay, I'm back and I found the appropriate cables. I really wanted to do this as much in real time today as possible. So if any anomalies happen or whatnot along the way, that you guys can see that as well. So I've got just some Monster cables now that have RCA to phone on them, and we'll go ahead and plug our audio interface into our mixer. Again, if you don't have a mixer that's connected to some speakers for you to hear the audio and all you've got is like headphones or whatever, just plug your headphones into the audio interface and that will work just fine. Let's see here, left and right. Okay. Now, lastly, we're going to need a way to have to MIDI control Beatmaker 3. I mean, I guess we could use just the screen, but I really like to use just a little MIDI controller for this. So we're gonna go ahead and use the Novation Launch Key Mini today. I really like this for the size. I'm just bummed that there's no mod wheel here. I also have the Novation Launch Key 25 that does have the mod wheel there for when I really need that. And we're going to go ahead and plug this into our powered USB hub. And this way, that's going to get the Launch Key Mini talking to Beatmaker 3. We're going to start by opening up a new session today. And let me see here. Change up the camera angle for you guys so that we can get as much of this in the shot as possible. Well, we've already struck an anomaly. I'm not really getting any output level from this Behringer Euphoria today. I've used this with my laptops in the past and not really had a problem. But today, it's really giving me a problem, and I'll show you what I mean. Here's the Sunriser synth on the iPad, which I've loaded up just to get a little bit of volume to my speakers and test out what's happening here. And I've got the Behringer Euphoria on full blast volume here. And to get a level to my system, I have to turn the gain up on this so loud that it's hissing through the speakers and pretty much unusable right now. So today we are definitely going to pass on the Behringer Euphoria, and what we're going to do instead is we're going to switch over and we're going to use this Focusrite Scarlett 2i2. So anomaly number 1, it happens to me too, guys. We're going to go ahead and we're going to turn our volume to the speakers down. We're going to unplug the Behringer, okay? And we're going to take the USB from that, and we're just going to plug that directly into my Focusrite Scarlett. And that's going to get us, let's see here, back to my speaker volume here. There we go. Whoa. Yeah, so you can see that's kind of the level that I was assuming that we were going to get out of the Behringer. But no matter what I tried, it just wasn't happening today. So let me move just a couple things around, and then we'll go ahead and keep moving forward. Okay, so moving forward, we've now swapped out the Focusrite Scarlett for the Behringer, and we've got Beatmaker 3 open. And what we'll do is start with a new session. Let's just make sure that we're getting volume from Beatmaker 3 to our mixer right off the jump. So I'll just load any patch, and we're definitely getting volume there, so that's great. We're going to go ahead and open up a new bank, and then I'll just delete that one that I loaded for testing purposes. Okay, so let's make sure that we've got our MIDI controller connected up to Beatmaker 3. What we're going to do is go ahead and click the option in the upper left. Then I'll click on a little gear icon to bring up our little, MIDI actions menu in our audio and MIDI devices. We're recording at 24 bits depth, and we're at 128 samples latency. We're going to go ahead and leave that for now. And I'm just going to go back to the Focus Actions window, and we're going to assign the knobs on the top of the Launch Key Mini to the macros inside of Beatmaker 3. So I'll click on where it says Macro 1, and I'm going to switch just move the knob on the Launch Key Mini, and it will assign that. And we'll go ahead and assign 3. And we'll assign 4 and 5. And this is going to give us the ability to start assigning things in Beatmaker 3 to these macros so that we can animate our sounds as we're playing them and whatnot. Macro 7. Macro 8. Alright, fantastic. So what we've got here is we've got ourselves a blank bank inside of Beatmaker 3. I'm going to go to the sampler tab. I'm going to hit the record option. And it's going to bring up our audio recorder window. I'm going to click where it says recording source, and we're going to choose an input, right? We're going to choose hardware input, and we're going to tell Beatmaker 3 that we want to record from the Scarlett 2i2 from the inputs 1 and 2. Then I'm going to click the monitor button on the bottom right hand side of this window, and that's going to allow us to hear whatever signal is coming into Beatmaker 3 as well as see it here. Now let's see here how we're gonna. Okay, fantastic. What I've done is I've got the virus set to just scroll through some pad sounds, and I've got the Big Sky set to a reverb preset that I like that has a really long decay on it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to attempt to play like a nice pad sound into the Big Sky, and then let the Big Sky's reverb take over, and just we're going to record that frozen reverb part out of the Big Sky, not the actual synthesizer sound itself out of the virus. And you'll see what I mean as we start to get going here. For some reason I'm only getting the right channel, so I'm gonna just double check all of my, sorry about that. I'm gonna double check my connections on the Big Sky. Probably should have turned my volume to the speakers down when I did that, to protect the speakers and also to protect your ears, so I apologize. But now we are getting a stereo sound into Beatmaker 3. And to give you an example of this technique, I'm just gonna turn the decay up on the Big Sky here all the way on this preset. And that's 50 seconds of reverb decay. That's almost a minute, and we're gonna just whatever pad this happens to be at, I'm gonna just play it, and what you can hear is we've got this atmosphere that just kind of hangs in the air, but I'm not actually playing the synthesizer. So what this is literally, it's just what I like to consider as frozen reverb. And what we're going to want to do is sample just that frozen reverb into Beatmaker 3. I'll turn this decay down. And then maybe we'll try another pad sample here. It's got a little bit too much. I'll turn the decay down to. It's got a little bit too much low end for my taste. I'll try the higher C here, or the higher F rather. So hear that, what you're looking for, at least what I'm looking for as a sound designer in creating these air pads, is that tone, the tone that's hanging in the air at this point. That sounds pretty nice. So what we're going to do is I'm going to turn the mix on the Big Sky up to about 3 o'clock, and I'm going to put the decay all the way back up, and I'm going to hit start on Beatmaker 3. And now Beatmaker 3 is just waiting for an audio signal. And as soon as it gets an audio signal that's above this little line here, it's going to start recording. And I'm going to record that on that F. And you could choose any root note for this you want. We're doing some really simple sampling today. We're just going to do one note recording into Beatmaker 3. I like to write in the key of F minor a lot, so my root note is going to be F today. Oftentimes, if you're only going to just sample one note to create a playable patch, you'll use C. But F is really the most common key that I'm writing in these days, so I'm going to use F for this. Okay, now we can see that it's recording here, but we've lost all audio level. And I've heard about this bug inside of Beatmaker 3. This is the first time that I've experienced this bug personally. It says that it's recording, and I am seeing a signal here, but as you can hear, it definitely dropped the audio signal out of our speakers the second that we started recording. So we're going to go ahead and we're letting it record for a good 20-30 seconds or whatever, grabbing that atmosphere from the Big Sky, hopefully, into Beatmaker 3. I'm assuming it's recording even though we can't hear it. And I'm going to just hit this recording again. And then there's our monitoring back. And as we look inside of Beatmaker 3, you can see that we, in fact, did record something. That is an odd anomaly, and I'm sure they'll fix that in an update at some point. So we get into our editing screen here now in Beatmaker 3, and we can see that we've got ourselves a recording of that atmosphere. Let's go into the process menu right off the jump and see if we can get this signal to be a little bit louder. We're going to normalize this, but if I were to click apply right now, it's going to make the whole signal just so loud that it's for the most part ridiculous. So I'm going to just undo that, and we'll click normalize. But instead of normalizing it to a maximum amplitude of 0, we'll pull this back, and we'll maybe put the maximum amplitude at like -6, which you can see still brings the level up quite a bit, but it's not just over the top. And what we'll do is we'll go into keys mode, and I should be able to start playing this pad right off the jump. But it sounds a little odd because we'll need to make some adjustments inside of Beatmaker 3 right away. We'll take it from the layer trigger from a one shot to hold mode, and this now means it's going to, play the sound when we hold the notes down and not play the entire sound every time we hit the sound. We're also going to need to bring the polyphony up inside of Beatmaker 3, and that means that we'll be able to hold more notes down than just one. If we leave the polyphony at 1, it will only play one note at a time. For pad sounds like this, I often like to start at around 12 voices, and we're going to go ahead and leave that at 12 for today. We're going to see here. I like to assign the gain to a macro, typically right off the jump, so that I have a lot more control over the volume of the sound as we're working with the sculpting here. So on the gain, I'm going to double tap this knob, and I'm going to click, macro, and I'm going to assign that to macro number 8. Okay, now if I click over here on our macro screen, I get our macro knobs up inside of Beatmaker 3. And I can click on the 3 dots next to the macro that I've just assigned, macro 8 to gain. And now we can adjust the minimum and the maximum volume that's going to happen inside of Beatmaker 3 when I move this knob. So when the knob is at the minimum position, we definitely want the gain to be all the way down at 0. And then when the knob is at the maximum position, we'll set it to 0, or in this case 1.5 maybe, to get a little bit louder than 0. And now, when I have the knob down, there's no volume in Beatmaker 3. And then I can control the volume with this knob as we're working. So what we'll do next to start sculpting this sound is we're going to assign the attack and the release of the amplitude envelope to some macros as well. And this is going to give us more ability to sculpt this sound in real time as we're actually playing the sound in our tracks and whatnot. So we're going to double click on the attack. We're going to select macro controls. I'm kind of defaulting to macro 1 as the attack control in just about all of my sounds. And we'll go into the macro screen. We'll click on those 3 dots and we'll set it to where the very minimum, setting here is that the attack is really, solid and all the way. But when you turn this knob, it's going to bring the attack up to about a second. We'll start with that. And we'll do the same thing with the release. We're going to double tap that, and we're going to click macro. We're going to assign that to macro number 2. Then on our macros page, we can click this, and we can set our minimum and our maximum value. Now, with release, if we were to set the minimum to 0, the sound is going to be really, really, really staccato. So what I'm going to do is set the minimum for now to about 282 milliseconds. And I'm going to set the maximum to quite a bit, 9 seconds. And then now, we'll have a really good control over the attack and the release of this sound in real time. I can soften that attack all the way till it really is a slow fade in, or has a really, sharp transient on it. And if we adjust that release macro, good for now. What let's do at this point is let's set this up so that we've got a sound that will infinitely sustain, because right now it's going to play through the sample, which is, granted, a pretty long sample. But what let's do is we're going to go, actually, for this, let's stay out of the edit screen and try to do this in the main screen. We're going to turn the sample from not looped to loop forward, okay? And this gives us a sample start point, and then it gives us a separate loop start point. So let's see here. We're going to turn our... It's been a while since I've done this, and I don't exactly see where to set the start and the end points differently, so give me just a second here. Do I need to set that in the... There we go. So here we have 4 different points in our sample here, where the sample starts, where it's going to start looping, and then the end of our sample. And we want this to be, quite a bit shorter, so we're just going to bring that, way back here for now. Okay. Cool. And then, why am I not getting that crossfade up? I think I have to turn disk streaming off to get the crossfade to be adjustable. And what that is it's going to allow us when the sample is, looping back and forth, it's going to sort of, crossfade that loop. The more we turn this crossfade amount up. I like to turn it usually quite a bit up in 5 milliseconds, and you can see on Beatmaker 3 how it's like sort of coming outside of the lines of our loop point here. And if I hold this down, we should hopefully start hearing it loop when it gets to the end of this loop point. We're hearing a little bit of like a volume change in there, but we're not hearing any clicks and pops, and that's what's really important. To get that as smooth as possible, you can play around with the time here on the crossfade duration, make it a little bit less, make it a little bit more. You can adjust the start and the end points of your loop, try to make them a little bit more visually accurate per se. At this point, what we've got is we've got a pretty decent looping sound, but what you might remember is that I sampled this on an F. I didn't sample it on a C, and we want to tell Beatmaker 3 that the root note of this is an F and not a C, and that way this sound will be in key with the other sounds that we're using to play. And so here inside of the mapping screen, I can set this root key note to like an F instead of a C. Awesome. And now, when I hit a C, it's playing a C. When I hit an F, it's playing an F. And we could start doing some, extra stuff here. We could go to the audio effects tab. We could add ourselves like a 6-band EQ. I have kind of a default setting that I use, which sort of starts trimming off the low frequencies as I roll up the first knob here. So in fact, maybe we could assign that knob to a macro right off the jump. If we double click that and assign that to say macro number 3, and then we come back over to our macros tab and we click the 3 dots next to macro 3, we can adjust these values here. So we can say like when the knob is at its minimum state, that filter should, let's see here, just take off the absolute lowest mud frequencies possible, like down to 30 hertz, which is basically not really affecting the sound much at all. But when we turn the knob up, let's have it, remove all the lows from the sound up to like, about 1,500 kilohertz per se. And let's see what that sounds like. Let's go down an octave here. Okay, so now when I turn this macro, we're removing the low end from the sound. Okay, so you can adjust that sort of to taste as you're playing the sound, and as you're trying to fit that sound in your mix. You can go in here and maybe give this a better title than cutoff, and we can just say this is actually a low cut, because we're cutting, let me capitalize this, we're taking the lows out, we're cutting the lows with this one. Give it a custom color, maybe give that one a custom color. Cool. Maybe give the whole bank a color that's not, just the standard color. I don't know. Doing this stuff, it's really up to you whether you want to, do the programming on the iPad or whether you want to do the programming with the MIDI controller. You certainly don't need to have an external controller to set up the macros. You can just, do these with your fingers and whatnot. Let's see here. Let's go back to our audio effects tab, right? And maybe put some like reverb on this sound, right? Maybe some inverb on this sound would be nice. Let's see about the default setting. Maybe we'll bring the mix down a little bit to say 25, but bring the room size up and get like a large reverb happening here. So we'll bring like the decay up to like 75, and we'll bring the room size up to like 85. cool. But maybe we want to have some adjustments on this reverb as we're playing, you know, this sound as well. So look on the mix of the reverb here. Let's double click that and assign this to a macro as well. Let's pick macro number 4. And we'll go back over to the macros tab here. And right now it just says mix. But this is actually our reverb level. So we're going to name the macro as such. Reverb mix. Cool. And we'll just, you know, pick a color for that macro as well. Let me actually set the maximum and minimum values for that. Let's say by, like, you know, default, if you turn the knob all the way down, it just has a very little bit amount of reverb. Let's say 10% dry wet. But if you turn the knob all the way up, let's say that, you know, it goes to a pretty high amount of reverb. Let's say 50% dry wet. And let's see, you know, what that sounds like in the mix. Pretty good. Now let's remember that I can adjust the attack and the release of this sound at any time with macros 1 and 2. So if we give it some more release and then crank that reverb up, it's starting to sound pretty darn nice. I like that as a pad. Now what let's do is let's continue assigning stuff to the macros at this point so that we can continue sculpting the sound as we're playing it. If we go back to our sampler window and we turn the filter on, right, we'll click where it says none, and let's assign this to a low pass filter. Let's go ahead and just leave the resonance at 50 for this, but let's bring this cutoff all the way up for now so that this filter is not affecting the sound at all. And let's double click that cutoff. We'll click macro, and let's assign that cutoff to macro number 5, right? We'll click the macros knob so that we can adjust our macros. And here's macro number 5, and it now says cutoff. And we will rename this to low pass filter. We'll give that a color. And then we'll click the 3 dots to open the window again, and we'll set our minimum and our maximum values for this. On a low pass filter, I find personally that you can get away with going down to about 300 hertz, usually by default, before the sound starts really disappearing into the mix. So we're going to set our minimum cutoff on this knob. Actually, I'm sorry, let's reverse this, because I like to have it so that the knobs, when they're at their 0 state, is like the full reset, right? So let's make this, when it's at a minimum value, when our knob 5 is at a minimum value, that it's not affecting that filter at all. And then as I turn this, it's going to low pass down. So we're going to take the maximum value instead of the minimum, the maximum value, and we're going to set this to 300. And again, that's just so that all of my knobs default to all the way left. If I can continually have that as the default position, it makes more sense than having to remember that, oh, you know, knob 5 needs to be all the way up for the cutoff of the filter as opposed to the other knobs, you know. So just for consistency's sake, that's how we're going to set that up. And we'll see what that sounds like when we low pass filter the sound down. Reset the knob there. So at its default position of all the way closed, our filter is all the way open. And as I turn that knob to the right, it closes down our filter. That's pretty nice. Let's go ahead and go back into our audio effects tab and go back up to our EQ section here. Oh, I see. It's doing that thing it does. This is, hey, anomaly number 2. Every now and again, Beatmaker 3 will sort of freeze and not let you pull up and down the effects tab. Now, if this happens to you, here's how I'm getting around it. This would be a great opportunity to save because we haven't done so yet. And we're going to go ahead and click save, and we're going to give this a title. For now, I'm just going to call this AirPad tutorial because That's all we need. And then we're going to go ahead and copy samples, and we'll go ahead and save this. We'll give it a second to do that. And we're just literally going to go ahead and double tap and restart Beatmaker 3. Perfect opportunity as well for me to get a little screen clean here. Okay. Let's see if we can't just open that session back up again. AirPound 2. Okay. Good deal. Now we should be able to scroll this again. Well, it's not scrolling, but at least it's going to let me back into the EQ for now. I'm hoping that these kind of bugs will be squashed in the next update. Until then, you know, we just do what we can to sort of, you know, work through that. What I'm doing here is I'm taking an EQ, which is set to 500 hertz, and this is a band shelf EQ, and I'm just bringing the gain down there a little bit. Let's try about 4 decibels for now. Actually, let's assign this to a macro as well. This is the mid range of the sound, and I often find that taming that frequency right about 500 hertz can help a sound sit into the mix better. So by assigning this to a macro, it's going to give us more flexibility of this sound as we're using it in our tracks. So let's go ahead and double click this, and we're going to assign this to macro number 6. And I'm going to give this a name of mid cut, because we're assigning this to the mid frequencies of our EQ. And let's say that at minimum, when the knob is at its minimum state, that nothing is happening with that EQ. So it's just going to be set to 0 decibels here. 0. Okay, fantastic. And then when I turn the knob up, it's going to dip those mid frequencies from the sound as much as we tell it here. So we want to take it to a negative value. Let's start off with a pretty big value here so that we can really hear what we're doing. I'm going to take the maximum value to negative 23 decibels to start off with. And again, this is, let's see, let's give this its own color so it'll stand out just a little bit. We're calling this mid-cut. So bring the filter back up on our sound so maybe we can hear just the mids being affected here by macro 6. That's really nice. So the sound in its original form has a lot of body in it. And if we turn down those mids, it kind of reduces that body a little bit. And as you're working with the sounds in your tracks and whatnot, you can kind of work on that frequency range until the sound really starts to sit in your mix instead of maybe riding on top of the mix. That's nice. Okay. Let's see here. You could continue sculpting at this point and pretty much, you know, do whatever sound design trickery that, you know, suits your fancy inside of Beatmaker 3. Let's continue doing just that. Let me go back to the sampler window here. And let's assign like an LFO to the fine-tuning of this sound so that we can get just some tiny little bit of adjustable pitch wobble in our mix. What we'll do is we'll double-click the fine-tuning knob here, and instead of assigning this to a macro, we're going to choose Modulate, and we're going to choose LFO, and we'll choose New LFO. And now we've assigned the fine-tuning of this sound to an LFO. If we go to the Modulations tab, we can see this LFO here. And if we click where it says LFO 1, it's going to bring up the controls of that LFO. What I like to do oftentimes is to sync the LFO to a really high rate, or maybe even like not necessarily a high rate, but like, you know, an eighth note or a quarter note. Maybe let's try a quarter note to start off with here, right? And that means that the LFO is going to be moving that fine pitch knob and kind of wobbling our sound ever so gently. If we adjust this fade in here, it'll start reading up some milliseconds. And what this means is how many milliseconds between when you press the sound is it going to wait before this LFO starts affecting the sound. I like to choose a little bit so that the sound will at least play a little bit on its own before you start to hear this effect in the sound. And then On the right hand side, we have a knob that says amount. And what this is going to do is, do us that exact, what it says, allow us to adjust how much of this effect is actually, affecting that knob inside of the sampler. And I like to assign this knob to a macro. So on the LFO, where it says amount, we're going to double click on that. And we're going to say macro control. We'll double click on that. We'll say macro controls, and we'll choose whichever empty macro you've got. Right now we've got an empty macro 7, so we'll choose that. We're going to go over to macro 7. And let's see, it's currently set to like 0 and 100. Let's say maximum. Let's leave it at 100 for now so you can really hear what this is doing to the sound. We're going to rename this macro to tape wobble instead of amount, so that it's a little bit more clear what we're actually doing. And let's see here. If I go back to the modulations tab and turn this % up, we should really dramatically hear what's happening. So you can hear that kind of wonky wobbling happening in the sound, right? Now, that amount of wobble is being controlled by the macro that we set it to. In this case, macro number 7. So if we set this super gently to say like 33%, got a pretty interesting sound happening here, and this sound came from just sampling the reverb itself off of a sound that came out of the Dark Star. Pretty cool stuff, you guys. Let's see what else we could do here. If we go back into the sampler tab and we go back into the sampler window, we could maybe assign a little bit of panning movement to our sound to get a little bit of action happening in the stereo field. So if we double click on the panning knob, we could choose modulate, and we could choose LFO, and we could choose new LFO. Okay, now we've assigned an LFO to the panning of our sound. We can go to the modulations tab, and that's LFO2. We can click on this and get our sync rate up again. So we'll sync that to tempo. And let's sync this one to, say, 1/8 note, right? And let's, again, turn this fade in knob up. The amount of, time before the effect, actually is heard, that's really up to you, and that's just part of sound design. For this, I'm going to choose 987 milliseconds. There's not really a reason for that. Just an arbitrary number for now. And the amount is at 100%. That means we're going to really hear the panning in the sound, hopefully. Yeah, we're definitely hearing it. So we'll turn this amount down, quite a bit, so that this becomes just a really subtle effect and not a really dramatic effect in our sound. I hope you guys have found this useful, and I hope maybe this has given you guys some inspiration as to what maybe you could set up and start recording inside of Beatmaker 3. I'm definitely going to be putting this patch as a free download beneath the video, so check beneath the video if you want to download this patch for free and start using it inside of your tracks. Last but not least, guys, let's remember to save. So I'm going to click save, and there we have it. Thanks for watching, guys. If you'd like to support the work that I'm doing on this channel, please consider becoming a patron. You can sign up over at patreon.com for as little as $1 a month. Thanks for your support, guys.